Okay, so let's go to start. Welcome everybody to our Research Data Alliance session on the Research Metadata Schemas Working Group. This is our third plenary meeting, and today we are going to report the progress on developing the guidelines for publishing structured data on the web. Here we have like a quick link for our collaborative notes, but you also have that information, the full URL, you have them on the chat for this session. So please feel free to go there and add your name, your data there, and we will use later the same document to add questions and to also for our breakout rooms. Sorry. Okay, so this presentation was mainly prepared by Chantel, Mingfan, Adam, and myself, with the collaboration of other people in the working group who were giving ideas about what to develop in this session and how it could be done. So thank you everybody for the contributions to this presentation. This is the agenda for today, the introduction to the working group. Then we will go 30 minutes reporting the progress. We have three main deliverables for our working group, and we will have one progress report for each of these deliverables, the guidelines, the crosswalks, and the tooling. Then we will split in breakout rooms. We will do this in 30 minutes. You will have to be patient with us because I saw that we had something like, I don't know, maybe 60 people for this session. I'm not so sure. I cannot see the numbers right now, but it was at least 2 screens on my laptop. So let me see. I cannot be on the presentation mode and see what's going on with the participants at the same time. Let me try. We are 38. Can you do a quick, can you go to the participants right now and do a quick yes, no for us to have like an idea? Is it okay if we do the breakout rooms kind of randomly? We just tell Zoom to please split things into more or less the same size for each one of the 3 breakout rooms. So yes, let's go for randomly, or no, you prefer to let us know which breakout room you want to participate. So let's go into do a yes, no quickly, please. I can see that most of the people is saying, let's go for the random allocation in the different groups. So let's go for that. Yeah, I only see a couple of votes for no. So we will go for the random allocation. That will save us some time as well. Okay, so we will have our breakout rooms that will be on the same subjects that we will present on the progress report, the guidelines, the crosswalks, and the toolings. And then we will have a breakout report. We have prepared some kind of guides on how to present this breakout report, but the different people working in this group, we will be on the different breakout rooms. So it's okay, we can help you to decide how this report will be done, and also to decide who is going to do that report. It doesn't have to be one of the presenters, it could be anyone. And then we will have a wrap up. Let's go to start with the introduction to the working group. Our working group, as I already mentioned, is the Research Metadata Schemas, and this is our third plenary meeting. We have 3 main objectives for this group. The first one is about communities, creating communities around this subject of research metadata schemas. And once we have created this community, we move to our second objective, which is identify what are the gaps that exist in these regarding the use of schemas and seeing how we can bridge those gaps and how we can fill them. So we really advance in the use of these schemas from what the community is telling us. And later, based on what the community is telling us, we want to provide some guidelines for the communities that we have right now and anyone coming later to those communities to be able to use the schemas markup. For instance, schema.org, but not exclusively, although it's the one that we have focused mainly. So why we are doing this? We have data everywhere. We have a lot of data, more and more data every minute, I would say. And people are providing this data, but sometimes they don't provide metadata, so it is difficult to use them. Sometimes they cannot connect to each other, so it becomes difficult to know what the similarities or what the differences are. So we want to move from these islands to something more connected, to something that could bring more benefits to the community. We want a common way to describe the data across different resources. It doesn't have to be exactly the same way for all the different resources, but it has to be common so people have better tools in order to access to that metadata and that data. And why do we want to do this? We want a common way because it is simple. If people know what is the way they can go there, they can go to the documentation and they can make things compatible with each other. I mentioned already that schema.org was kind of our main focus, although we have crosswalks and we will show them later. We will see them later today to other possible schemas. But we are using schema.org because it is commonly used across the web. Not only by the major search engines, but by research groups as well. And we have seen that it is simple enough to have good metadata. What this common way to describe data will allow us. For instance, we can easily have this collection of pictures if we know that the websites are actually providing pictures, so we can just collect them. Or we can create summaries that are giving us more information that will give us like a good overview, like a quick idea of whether we want to go further and get the data of that resource or not. What are the benefits that we think this will bring to research data infrastructures? We want to increase interoperability. If we are following a common way, the interoperability will be easier across data catalogs. And this interoperability will also enable federated searches across these different repositories. Remember, it has to be a common way, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same one. As far as we know how the different schemas are mapped to each other with our crosswalks, then we can translate from one to each other. And this would allow us to support a spectrum of data search needs. For instance, we can work with JSON APIs, or we can go for Sparkle queries, and everything on top of a common layer. Now, if you are not yet part of our working group, you are welcome to join. We have a monthly call on the second Thursdays at 8 p.m. GMT. We will not have this meeting exactly this week because we are having the plenary. You can also participate, as you are doing today, in the plenary meetings that we have. We also have the group mailing list. So you are welcome to join our different channels and to start participating in here, or give us more ideas about how you could benefit from all the data that we are working on or working with, sorry. Now let's go to move to the very first point in our agenda, which is the progress report on the different deliverables that we are working on. And let's go to start with the guidelines. So we are creating guidelines for two main personas. We are creating guidelines for structured metadata publishers, people that have data on a website and they want to provide structured metadata on top of what they already have in the website. And they want to integrate that in such a way that it is not disruptive with the website experience. The other persona that we are taking into account is structured metadata consumers. We have the first group that it is providing metadata about what they have and what they offer on their websites. And we also have the metadata consumers. When you are a consumer, it might be that you want to create an aggregated site. So you are bringing metadata from different providers, you are putting them together, and you are giving like a added value to it, and you want to provide this aggregation. The other possibility is that you want to create tools on top of the metadata that you are consuming, like the summaries that we are seeing here about the frogs. By the way, I selected a summary about frogs because we would have been in Costa Rica if it were not because of the pandemic that we have right now. And Costa Rica has a very large biodiversity. So this is why I selected particularly the frogs. What is the purpose of these guidelines? Understanding the purpose, what we want to achieve, and understanding what we cannot cover, are both equally important. So we are going to provide recommendations on how to add a structured markup on websites. These recommendations are looking forward to publishers to effectively expose their metadata and benefit from it, benefit from this offering of their metadata. We also want the recommendations to serve aggregators so they understand how the publishers are offering their metadata so they can get it. And in this way, we want to contribute to the fairness of data, particularly metadata on top of the data that it is exposed via websites, and mainly the F bit, although, as we already mentioned, we are targeting interoperability as well, thanks to this common way of doing things. What we are not targeting with these guidelines, what is out of the scope? We cannot provide recommendations on exactly which schema to use. We can tell you which schemas we know that are around. We can provide crosswalks across them, but it is up to the provider to decide which one is the best for them. We are not providing any recommendations on how to create schemas or vocabularies or ontologies or extend them. This is out of the scope. We cannot provide information on how the search engines work and exactly what you are supposed to do in order to increase your ranking in any of the major search engines. That is kind of top secret for each search engine, so we cannot provide you any information about this. And we cannot support either your production pipeline in order to get this structured markup on your website. We can give you kind of clues and hints about the things that you need to take into account to get this into the production successfully, but we cannot tell you exactly how to do it. People use so many different approaches to produce a website. It could be manual production, it could be integrated to a pipeline. They will be using different front-end frameworks, different back-end frameworks. So we cannot provide any particular recommendation for this. Now, let's go to start with guidelines for metadata publishers. It is very important whenever anyone is going to provide metadata to know why. What is the purpose of providing this metadata? It is because they know that some aggregators are getting this metadata and they want to make it easier for them. Is it because making a specialized API doesn't seem to be the way to go, and they know that just providing the structured metadata will allow crawlers to get the data? Is it because there is a community and you want to participate on this community? Or maybe you want to go for the generic case Google data search in case you are using schema.org, for instance. Now, once you have defined the purpose, then you will know what elements you want to describe. It could be that your data is providing a lot of dimension and a lot of elements in there. But depending on the purpose of the metadata that you want to expose, you will see that you don't need to expose absolutely everything, but maybe only some key elements in there. So you need to define what is your data scope in order to reach the purpose that you already defined. You also need to decide which schema you should use. And this could be maybe because some people in your team already have expertise on that schema, or because you belong to a particular community that prefer one schema over the other one. So you need to take this into account. The community is very, very important, because if there is a community already using this schema, or if there is a community that you want to belong to that it is using this schema, most probably you will have some support from this community. You might find some people that can tell you, oh, this is the way that we did it. Take a look to our example. So this is important and can make your life easier when you are actually providing the metadata on top of your website. It's also important to take into account how this metadata is going to be integrated into your regular production pipeline. Because if you have a really big website that it is exposing a lot of metadata, doing it by hand, it's kind of crazy. Now, if you want to provide some metadata, let's suppose because you are running an event and this is a, let's say maybe once a year event, is not too big, the metadata is not too much, and you don't want to go into the trouble to create a whole program to do it, yeah, maybe doing it manually will work. So you need to decide how you are going to do this. And you need to take into account who is going to consume this metadata. You need to make it easier for both humans and for crawlers. You will have a lot of crawlers that will go and will retrieve your metadata. So using things like sitemaps and robot files will make things easier for the crawlers. And the documentation will make it easier for humans. Let's go now to move to the guidelines for metadata consumers, those that are taking the metadata that is provided by someone else. So if you are creating applications out of the metadata, similar to the summaries that we have already mentioned, or any other sort of application on top of the metadata, it is very important that you credit the sources. Where are you getting that data from? Where are you getting that metadata from? And you should expose metadata yourself as well on how you combine the different elements. What is your source of data and what sort of transformation you are doing there. And it is very important that you pay attention to the licenses, because maybe you cannot transform the data. Maybe that is against the license. So you need to take that into account as well. You are aggregating metadata, providing documentation about how you are aggregating the different metadata. If there is no a clear common path across the different sites that you are using to aggregate this metadata, you need to say how you are mapping from one model to the other. So you need to provide crosswalks and you need to provide documentations. And again, you always should respect the licenses of the data that you are gathering. And again, you should also provide metadata. Metadata is very, very important. And this is what I wanted to share with you today about guidelines that we are working on. Now we are going to invite Chantel to tell us more about the crosswalks. Chantel, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so you can share your screen. That will be easier for you to move from one to the other one. So Chantel, you should be able to share your screen because I already stopped mine.
Yep, just give me 1 second and I will be able to grab it. In the meantime, I'm just going to drop the link to the crosswalks in the chat just in case anybody wants to follow along. And let's see if I can share my screen. Should be good. Okay, can you guys see it?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Let me see. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Layla, for that. My name is Chantal Berry, and I'm a research associate with the WGS International Technology Office, hosted at Ocean Networks Canada. I will be giving a brief update on the state of our crosswalk visualizations. So the crosswalk visualizations were created out of output 1 for data model for the working group, a generic conceptual data model with essential types and properties for research data discovery over the web. We want to make note that a roadmap for the crosswalk visualizations in schema.org will be created by March 2021. And previously, as Layla has mentioned, the roadmap will be outlining how a data repository chooses a metadata schema. And typically they do so for 3 basic reasons. What are the data the repository is going to hold or describe? What are the available standard schemas there are for same or similar type of data? And would a candidate schema enable the description of property or entity that thoroughly describes the data and that users could search for specific descriptions? So some progression since the last RDA plenary. We would like to make note that we don't do the crosswalks ourselves. We gather, then align them to the schema.org property or a DCAT. So we've collected about 15 metadata schemas that's including DCAT data site, ISO 19115, EOSC Dataverse, bioschema B2Find, as you can see on the screen. And we have 4 interactive visualizations created and living at the link that I did drop in the chat right before. So basically, there are 2 major sources, one from schema.org and the other from DCAT, whose property can't be mapped to schema.org. But the first group A, includes those properties recommended by Google Dataset Search. So currently, we are investigating the best home for the crosswalks. The teams met with developers of the metadata standards catalog at UBath, began as a metadata standards registry of the DCC website and migrated to a metadata standards directory on GitHub, and more recently, the metadata catalog of UBath. It's just one pathway that we've looked into for hosting their crosswalks. Specifically to UBath, it does not seem to be working as they originally intended it, so we're continuing to investigate a proper home for them. So our crosswalk creation will be highlighted in the guidelines as Layla had mentioned. Our current crosswalk home is a living Excel sheet that our team contributes to. The link is on the screen. You can find it in our slides. And our current crosswalk website lives in GitHub. So getting down to the nitty-gritty of the actual crosswalks, our option 1 is started off as a one-off standalone set of visualizations that get screen capped and included in the recommendations or guidelines from the working group. Option 2 is the creation of the web page. And so this option is more of a visualization that can help people who are interested in adding schema.org to the metadata and want to know what other groups are mapping to. It's more of a prompt or talking point generator. Again, if it would be a one-off read of the current state of crosswalks. So our first set of actual interactive visualizations is our filter table. This provides a one-to-one mapping of metadata terms to schema.org. It utilizes the top level schema.org and identifies any missing terms from either this schema or from SGO suggested terms with no current mappings. So they're filtered by metadata schema. Our next visualization is the search table. So the table is a free text search over both metadata and schema.org properties. It will pull all related metadata terms for associated properties searched. For example, if you're searching for publish, it will not return records, but if you search for publish, it will return related terms like date published, publisher, dataset publisher. Just last week, we updated to include the schema parent type for free text search. For example, if you wanted to see all parent types, including schema thing, it should pull up all of those cases. Next, we have our Sankey diagram. So this filter allows you to choose the schema.org property and see which, if any, crosswalk term is currently connected to the standard. Sankey diagram, it emphasizes the major transfers of flow within the system, which is fantastic to see. And then from left to right, it starts with your schema.org properties, your crosswalk term, and your metadata standard. And then finally, we have our gap analysis. So our gap analysis gives a visual representation of terms within the metadata standards that did not have a schema.org property. By hovering over the metadata standard name, it will display a numerical value. And since schema.org is so lightweight, some of these values can be quite high. So for our discussion is we are looking to see if the kernel alignment, the categories and the source properties make sense, and should the categories of the source properties be shown into more of a visualization tool. But to conclude, to still be determined once the working groups completes the established deliverables is the fate of the visualizations we made of the crosswalks. This option is about creating a living database of the schema.org crosswalks that live in possibly our office. But furthermore, we want to see how else it can be developed. So possibly integrate into other tools, a tool that uses the crosswalk and actually marks up the metadata. Toolings are to be discussed more by Adam Shepard next. But assume you had a set of metadata as either XML or JSON or something, and you had to add some Python or JavaScript or something that generated HTML landing pages on the fly. And those landing pages had metadata terms, and you wanted to add schema.org alongside those terms. Currently, at a minimum, we are managing the first couple of options, but there's a need for assisting in the cleanup of the backend. We can continue to update the new crosswalks, but I don't know if I can develop it into either a proper ontology with relationships or if we can develop any standalone tools from it. It would be obviously a longer term project that we can look into resources for if the community feels there's a need. But yeah, as of right now, the topic of discussion for our breakout session would be what additional sort of data do we want to cover, do we want to include in our crosswalks? And I believe that is it for my portion. I guess Adam would be next.
Thanks, Chantel.
No problem.
Let's see, I can share my screen.
Yeah, you got it now?
I do, thanks.
Okay, no problem.
All right. Okay, so on the tooling side, let my slides here load up. Is everyone seeing the full screen slide now?
Yeah, it looks good, Adam.
Okay, great. So yeah, what we've done on the tooling side is really try to catalog the tools that we know about. And that was just really to facilitate easier execution of a bunch of different use cases across a couple categories. And those categories were really to just generate markup, validate that markup, and then to be able to harvest the markup of others. Yeah, and so we started this task in the summer of 2019 and built out a Google Sheet, and you can go to it by this bit.ly link, which I guess I could paste in the chat when I get a minute. But essentially, we haven't gathered too many tools across these three categories, but we do have 8. And the types of fields that we're collecting for these tools are obviously the name, the description of what it does, the landing page URL for that tool, maybe a URL to the tool itself, if that's possible, and then just sort of who sponsored that work and maybe a contact for bug fixes or reporting error issues or for the development of that resource. And then finally, if there's a license for use or reuse of that tool, just capturing that information and then just other notes. And so I think for the breakouts here that we want to get to, there's a couple questions. Obviously, one, we know of just these tools that we've interacted with, but we're curious about other tools in this space that you folks might know about. And so we want to collect those, but also how do we curate that list as we move forward as a community? So, and certainly after this working group, dies down, how do we sort of manage that list over time? So just want to highlight the tools that we have cataloged in the markup generation. There's a couple, and the first one is Code Meta Generator, and that is essentially generating schema.org metadata for describing software projects, and sort of build schema.org extensions off of the software application and software source code classes in the schema.org vocabulary. What's nice there with Code Meta is that if you're describing software resources, it sort of bridges the gap between sort of like these description libraries that come native to the actual source code, and then just this basic discovery metadata about these software packages. The next tool is called Geocodes, and that comes out of a National Science Foundation initiative called EarthCube. They sort of sponsored a little project that tried to understand schema.org from the perspective of describing a scientific data set. And so they built out a tool that lets you manually enter in through a UI fields as you're prompted for describing that scientific data set with schema.org properties and classes. The next tool is a little bit more generic, so it works across any sort of schema.org class, and that is the schema generator coming out of Italy. And that's a website where, again, you can sort of manually fill out form fields to build the metadata. And then finally, this other product that I'm not terribly familiar with called Dendro, which seems like more of a data management platform for managing and describing data sets. And this tool sort of has support for multiple ontologies for describing that. And so when you enter a data set or upload a data set rather into Dendro, you get prompted to fill out some metadata fields, and based on what you fill out, it can publish out some schema.org metadata. All right. On the validation side, we have two tools. Obviously, the Google Structured Data Testing tool, which, if you followed the recent news in that space, Google is deprecating in favor of the Google Rich Results tool. And so on the right-hand side, just have a quick picture of what the Rich Results tool looks like if you enter in a URL. And so what you can do on that tool is submit a URL to have Google inspect it, or just paste in inline markup, and it can give you a report based on how well it feels you filled out that metadata form. And one thing to note with Google is that those tools are, it's using the schema.org vocabulary as the base, but it has its own interpretation of what is required and recommended and optional. And so that's one thing to be aware of when you're using Google tools there. The other tool is a Chrome plugin built coming out of that same NSF EarthCube initiative. There was a developer at University of Kentucky named Dave Vieglis, who took the guidelines that came out of that initiative called Science on Schema.org and built a Google Chrome plugin. So you can essentially navigate to a page with the plugin installed, click the little icon for the plugin, and get a report, as you can see on the right-hand side of that column, of what's valid with respect to the Science on Schema.org recommendations there. All right, and then finally, in the harvesting space, there might be plenty more, but another one that we know of is this package called Gleaner, which is written in Golang, and it packages up some tools in the harvesting space, but also validation space as well, using technology called Shackle. And in fact, the schema.org or Science on Schema.org Chrome plugin is built on top of the Gleaner software. And so Gleaner lets you sort of give it a URL or a list of URLs to sitemap indexes for multiple sites, and the tool sort of essentially crawls that list or collection of sitemaps to generate out schema.org as JSON LD, and it lets you put it into a triple store or wherever you want to store it for further inspection. And I just put in a little image there to Doug Phil's the developer of that project. He put together a 30-minute video that kind of like walks you through that whole process of adopting that software if necessary. So what's next for us? Clearly we want to hear about more tools that you folks know about, but how do we also curate that list? And one idea that came up was adopting this notion of the quote unquote awesome lists. And this is a movement happening on GitHub, where folks that know about cool or quote unquote awesome tools, sort of list them and curate that list in a GitHub repository that then gets published out as HTML. One of the drawbacks here is, clearly with 8 tools, maybe it's overkill, or maybe it's not enough to be considered a quote unquote awesome list. And so that's just one consideration. So the working group really decided that, we want to look for other alternatives and get feedback from you folks about how we sort of collect, but also curate a list of tools. All right. So I think we're at the breakouts. Layla, how do you want to manage this? I'm not sure if I have the ability, and I don't know if y'all trust me to push you into breakouts.
Okay, I'm going to do initially. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the chat that maybe there was a question there. Okay, I'm going to allocate the breakout rooms randomly. So let's going to do the following. We will have breakout room for guidelines, breakout room. So we have that in the document, actually. So the breakout 1 is guidelines, 2 will be crosswalks, 3 will be toolings, okay? Perfect. I will have to move some of you to make sure, for instance, that Adam is in the tooling and so on, but just give me a moment. You will be moved to a breakout room now.
Hello, is there anyone there?
Hi, Leila. Do you know if people need to leave the breakout room to come back?
Yes, sorry, they have, and they will be forced in 35 seconds.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. So I think we are all back in the main room. Let's going to then start with our report regarding the breakout rooms. Let's going to do it in the same order as we did the presentation. So we are going to start with the guidelines. Who is going to report from the guidelines breakout room?
I volunteered to do that. My name's
Thank
Christopher
you,
Rash.
Christopher. Please go ahead.
I'll actually present the report.
Yes, please.
Okay, we discussed the working group guidelines for publishing structured data, which exists as a work in progress on a website. It's a high-level overview of different recommendations for institutions to implement shareable metadata research on landing pages, and gives some thought to how one might do it. And it's kind of a long, lengthy document, so we didn't get a chance to really discuss it in depth, but it is out there and it is a work in progress. And I think I will probably put the summary in more detail in the notes, but that seems to be it was mostly an informational session on the guidelines and what they will be covering.
Thank you, Christopher. We also point out there are a couple of communities there and doing a guideline for that specific communities, like polar communities that have a group of 80 repositories. So we will reach out to see what other communities are doing. So complement to each other's.
I would like to add something else that was mentioned in the breakout room, and is the balance between what it is targeting a specific community and what it is broad enough to go as a recommendation for everybody. And that is a challenge that we will have to figure it out how to deal with when we get to the final set of recommendations. And something important here also is that we don't want to repeat something that other groups are already doing well. For instance, science and the schemas and bioschemas are providing tailored guidelines on what properties to use, how to use them, when to use them, what the cardinality should be, and so on. So we will not repeat this, but it is important that we include this information, that we point toward this information in our guidelines as well. And we had some questions about what we were meaning in one particular one. So maybe adding some examples is a good idea for us to provide a better explanation on what we are meaning by the recommendation. Okay, so I think that was our report for the breakout room number 1, guidelines. Thank you very much to all the participants. Let's going to move to breakout room 2, which is Chantel. Who is Chantel? And about the crosswalks.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to give it kind of a quick synopsis of what we discussed. So a couple fantastic points for the updates to the crosswalks was suggested to include or enhance the gap analysis visualization to include commonly missed terms instead of just the schema. So we think there was a lot of interest in seeing that for repositories who are looking at kind of trying to implement the markup to see where their next challenge might be. Also to enhance the Sankey diagram to include possible pop-out that shows the crosswalk term and how it is actually shown in the schema would be beneficial. It was also brought up that the community would like to see the schema should be linked to PIDs information records and yeah, and just that some common problems with the markup and actually being shown in Google dataset search was discussed as well. But other than that, it was great. Thank you everybody for participating.
Thank you very much, Chantel. I added some notes to our slides, so we also have some final notes there when we share the slides with the rest of the community. Adam, it is your turn now for the breakout room session number 3 about the tooling.
Great. Yeah, so we talked about 3 main topics or questions rather. First was sort of just letting everyone sort of type out or contribute into the notes document what tools they're using. And so we had one repository that's using a contributed Drupal module for their Drupal site, which is great. It's not custom code, so it's a contribution out to the Drupal community. And then a couple other tools that folks were aware of but aren't using, so they couldn't make any calls as to their usefulness. But the first was a validation tool by Google called Schemarama, and that's available on GitHub. And then also made me aware of this great software page that Bioschemas host there. And so that might be another resource that we can mine for inclusion in our spreadsheet. And then we also talked about ways that we can curate this list together. Does it stay in Google or move to some other resource? And yeah, didn't have a ton of input or feedback there, but one thing that got mentioned was that Google Docs or keeping it in the spreadsheet is great. So long as we can link off to that resource from some central place. So maybe that comes right off of the working group's RDA website page. Others mentioned, wiki page or GitHub to use. So I think we just need to do a little bit more inspection on the telecons there as to how we want to have that resource grow and be curated over time. But then we also talked about, what are folks' needs out of the tooling? And so one was just sort of an assessment of completeness. And so if you are doing a crosswalk, how well did that metadata, original metadata format translate into schema.org? What is lost in that crosswalk? Which is a really great thought there. And then we just ended up just discussing in brief the differences between what's happening here at the RDA group and then other groups like Bioschemas and Science on Schema.org. So thanks everyone for participating. We really appreciate it.
Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. We are getting to the end. So because we did it great on the timing for the breakouts and for the report, we can have some minutes for any open questions. So if you have any questions at this time, please just raise your hand and we can address some of the questions that you have now during our session. Ray, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna repeat a question that I posed in my breakout group, thanks to Chantel, I think I know the answer, but it might be useful for everybody to hear it. I was curious about whether there is, in the concept of this working group, a notion of a website providing metadata in multiple formats. So there might be a schema.org section, there might be a Dataverse section, there might be a DCAT section, and so that harvesters that are looking for a particular format can search for the one that they're looking for, and then the provider can take responsibility for the proper crosswalking of the information. Is that part of the concept here? And I'll leave it there.
Chantal, this was discussed in your breakout room. Do you want to add anything here?
I think we said that it is possible for that to be done, and we were kind of more talking about if, and I guess Leila, you might be able to confirm this, if it's going to be addressed in the guidelines. Just kind of, I guess, how to go about that, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think it will be addressed in the guidelines because there are some technical issues when you are mixing implementations that should be addressed, and I don't think our guidelines will go to that technical level. So I'm afraid not. We can have a look into it to provide a high-level guideline, but going into details on how you can actually merge multiple schemas in your structure metadata, I don't think so. But we can add some tips about what the benefits of doing it are, and what the disadvantages as well. What sort of issues you can encounter when you are merging different schemas in there. To be honest, I have never done so. So I don't know what is the sort of problems that you can encounter there.
Well, one of the big problem is, I think, is how to identify what schema is being included. So you can have multiple metadata records in there. There's a mechanism for doing that. But what seems less clear to me is how you say, okay, this is my schema.org record, this is my Dataverse record, this is my data site record, or whatever, And so that would be something to explore, a good, kind of a best practice for how to do that, and to make a recommendation to the community. I think that would be valuable.
Thank you, Ray. Okay, I'm adding notes about this. John, you also have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
There we are. I had to unmute. A topic that came up in our breakout that I wanted to surface to see if anyone else had inputs was that two of us have had the experience of putting our data into schema.org. Hopefully I'll capture the other gentleman's experience as well. Putting our metadata into schema.org in the web page, and not ever be able to get Google to actually index the web page, even by explicitly asking and creating indexes and so forth. While some of that is certainly due to SEO, I think we waited months in the one case. And and it was a few years ago, but I'm wondering if people have the other experience or extensive experience with successfully getting their schema.org content indexed.
Anyone who has experience with these being indexed by Google successfully or not, who would want to share their experiences here?
Well, maybe I can confirm that. I mean, we've had part of this discussion also in our breakout room, but indeed I brought up the issue, and it seems that John had same issue at the time. But we've done a lot of effort in actually including schema.org metadata into the landing pages of our central search catalog, only to find out that a trivial amount of pages is then actually harvested. So yeah, I was wondering also there to learn from experience from others, whether this is something that is more general, or whether we are an exception there, because it gives, I mean, also in the context of the existence of this this group, then it helps to get a bit of an estimate of how much effort one should devote to including metadata, as it is embedding metadata in the web pages.
Yes, we know that it is tricky, and it is not easy to get an answer, because exactly what the algorithm that Google uses is secret, really. But we have seen that with the Google data set search that they have now, they are indexing a lot of websites using the data set from schema.org. I'm not so sure, for instance, how it works in terms of events.
It's, yeah, and it's a bit a lot of their data set indexing from data repositories is driven by conscious trying to build their own data set catalog, as it were, as opposed to organically found schema.org markup. I'm sure, you know, the schema.org markup clearly works really well for recipes. And so it's not like the process isn't happening, but my thought or feeling is that something about the page ranking and about the amount of assets they have allocated to chasing down and indexing schema.org data set metadata is not producing a result that's actually working right now. For people who are trying to do it on their own sites, that is to say. If they happen to be registering their data on one of the bigger sites, good to go, because there's another mechanism that Google has for those.
Well, I mean, maybe for sure already late now, but maybe for the next plenary, we could try to find someone from Google Datasets to give a talk as part of our plenary session next time. But that will be next year, but it is an idea that we will keep in mind, because we know that there are a lot of questions about how it works. I am supposed to be doing everything that you say. I have the same as my neighbor does. My neighbor is indexed and I am not. What's going on with me? We know that we have those questions. Let's going to have one more question from Alex. Or
oh no, I was just going to comment on the fact that at the University of Bath we embed schema.org metadata in the head of all of our landing pages, and our experience with them being picked up by the Google dataset search is that it is heavily dependent on you also having a sitemap. Yeah, the XML machine processable sitemap. And we found there were when we were when I was first checking our visibility on Google Dataset Search, I found that the ones that hadn't been listed on there weren't showing up. But as soon as I had fixed whatever problem that we were having with our sitemap, so that it was including all of our data sets, then suddenly they all got picked up. And so I think it's more than just embedding the schema.org. There's a whole other series of steps that you need to do.
Thank you, Alex. Well, I am
yes.
seeing from the chat that it doesn't always work. So
Leila, can I add on that side map?
yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we have one recommendations in the guidelines. So how to be friendly for the web crawler, basically how to construct a side map. So Google has dataset has these tools. First, you can go to check, put either individual URL of a web page or put the root the URL of that website to check which page is be indexed or which not be indexed. You can find out. And secondly, Google Guide explicitly said they will not index all URLs inside the map because there are, for example, if you have a duplicate, have a record, say, have 10 versions of the data set, have a similar metadata record, they wouldn't index that 10 web pages. They probably would index the latest one. So yeah, so there are a few tricks over there. So, and also not have a long list of, say, 10 URLs in one side map. You can put a hierarchy construct in some way, so easier for crawl to understand. But if you have any experience, good tricks, please add to the guideline. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for this great session. We have learned about some bits here and there that we will need to include in our data, in our recommendations that we will use to improve the crawler and the visualization tools, and some recommendations about the tooling as well. Thank you very much. If you want to become a member of our group, you have all the links here on our slides. Just go to the group in the Research Data Alliance pages, and then you can just join our group in there. If you are not a Research Data Alliance member yet, well, you can join in this user register link. And I think that was everything today. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the plenary. Hopefully it will be in a time zone friendly to you. We know that it is not the case for everybody, but thank you for joining today, and have a great rest of the day, evening, and have a great time in the plenary. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, Leila.
Thank you, Leila.
Thank you. See you later.